We have to begin with a story that just perfectly defines turning internal pain into external performance metrics. It's the blueprint of one of the original sharks, Barbara Corcoran.
It is.
Her origin story is just a masterclass in translating betrayal into pure, cold strategy.
Yeah, it's less a story of, simple ambition and more a story of categorical refusal. This is 1970s New York City. Corcoran is young, she's ambitious, and she has that specific productive kind of irritation of someone who knows they are smart and just being underutilized.
And she started her real estate business with her boyfriend and business partner, Ramon Simone.
Right. And the start is tiny.
So small. It's built on a $1,000 loan. But she discovers the electric nature of the real estate game, the confidence, the storytelling, the hustle.
They're small, they're scrappy, and they're growing. But that period of growth is interrupted by a deeply personal, almost calculated betrayal.
And the hinge moment is truly brutal.
It's awful.
Years into the partnership, Simone leaves her. And as our sources detail, he didn't just leave quietly.
No, he left to marry her secretary.
Unbelievable. Corcoran described this move as specifically designed to humiliate her, to break her confidence.
It's the kind of vicious moment that forces you to question your entire path.
And here's where it gets really, really interesting. Because the predictable human response is to internalize the failure.
Oh, absolutely.
You collapse into self-pity, or even worse for an entrepreneur, you quietly shrink your goals so you never expose yourself to that kind of pain again. You retreat.
But Corcoran does the exact opposite. She gets angry, but she demonstrates this principle of keeping the anger clean.
What do you mean by clean?
It's not chaotic. It's not destructive anger that involves years of rumination or lashing out. It's focused anger, and it dictates a new rule.
Which is?
You do not get to be the author of my story, and you will not limit my future.
So she doesn't spend years arguing with him. She instantly turns the personal insult into a business metric.
Like scoreboard.
A scoreboard. She forces the split, divides the business, and just keeps pushing forward, fueled, as our sources note, by something sharper than ambition. The drive to prove.
And that is the genius of the pivot. Her goal wasn't just to make money.
No.
It was to outsell her ex-partner. She used his specific slight as a diagnostic tool. It told her, your confidence is low, your visibility is weak.
So what does she do?
So she built a sales system and a confidence culture that just could not be dismissed. She built the Corcoran Group into an absolute powerhouse and eventually sold it in 2001 for a staggering $66 million.
To $66 million.
That figure wasn't just profit, it was the final, undeniable score on that board.
That is the core difference. The principle she established is to use rejection as proof of market reality, not as proof of personal inadequacy.
Yes, that's a critical distinction.
Most people, when they get rejected, they immediately engage in emotional labor, right?
Right.
Chasing the person who dismissed them, begging for a second look, over-explaining their value.
You're still letting the rejector set the rules of the game.
Exactly.
Right. In wealth terms, rejection is just a signal that your offer isn't positioned correctly, or your value isn't visible yet, or that you're trying to win inside someone else's broken game.
Corcoran's move was such high leverage because she stopped asking the gatekeeper, in this case her former partner, to change his mind.
She just built so much momentum, so much structural value, that his original no became historically irrelevant.
So we can define the key concept here as productive anger. Anger that isn't consumed by the self, but is immediately translated into an asset.
Like a stronger brand, a tighter sales system.
A functional pipeline, a portfolio of clients. Anger is the ignition to do the hard thing, to publish the offer, to demand the higher price, to walk away from a bad deal.
And then discipline takes over.
Then discipline takes over. Okay, now let's move to a completely different industry, different historical context, but keep that same high-thrust fuel.
We're going to examine what we're calling the Walker Maneuver, a powerful example of converting anger into public assertion, and then into measurable infrastructure.
We're talking about Madam C.J. Walker, born Sarah Breedlove, who built a transformative hair care empire for Black women.
An incredible story.
She rose from the cotton fields and being a washerwoman to become one of the wealthiest women in America. Her journey was marked by persistent, systemic exclusion, but one moment in particular really illustrates this pivot.
And the context here is just crucial. It's 1912, the National Negro Business League Convention in Chicago.
This was the place to be.
Oh, absolutely. The most prestigious, established stage for Black business leaders in the country, and it was presided over by Booker T. Washington.
And Walker had arrived as a major manufacturer, but she found her name was deliberately excluded from the program.
A classic example of gatekeeping, a quiet truth that, you are fighting for oxygen even at the highest levels.
And Walker, whose entire life was a refusal of limited expectations, she realized that if she waited politely for permission,
The door would just close.
the door would simply close. The anger she carried was that sharp, clean anger of being constantly underestimated because of her race and her gender.
And this leads to the legendary hinge moment. She refused to be silent.
She stood up.
She stood up, a Black woman asserting herself in a largely male-dominated space, and directly challenged the gatekeeper's choice. She said, "Surely you are not going to shut the door in my face."
Wow.
That assertion was the necessary rocket booster.
But the brilliance is that she didn't just protest. That's not where it ended.
Not at all. She immediately followed that assertion by claiming a public narrative of upward mobility, and she backed it up with receipts.
What do you mean by receipts?
She introduced herself not as someone asking for permission, but as a woman who came from the cotton fields and who had successfully moved into large-scale manufacturing and commerce.
She was creating jobs.
She was creating jobs for thousands of women across the country. What she was doing was using her anger to force reality onto the room.
And the reality was...
The reality was her competence, her market share, and her infrastructure, her factories, her sales agents, her training schools. She wasn't asking, she was declaring.
So the principle of the Walker maneuver is crystal clear. Convert the initial anger into public assertion, then immediately convert that assertion into infrastructure.
Right. The anger serves as a diagnostic tool. It tells you there's a gap between your recognized status and your undeniable capacity.
And she used that spark to break the passivity.
And then let the discipline of her existing business systems take over. She forced the room to recognize the profitable market it had intentionally ignored.
These are such a powerful pair of blueprints. Corcoran showed us the immediate conversion of personal betrayal into metrics.
And Walker showed us the immediate conversion of systemic exclusion into public leveraged assertion.
Okay, so let's make this practical for you, the listener. What are the immediate actionable tactics for turning that first spike of rejection into forward momentum? This is the first rep.
First, you employ the scoreboard shift. When that rejection hits, your default emotional response is to chase the person who rejected you, right? Rereading emails, trying to prove your worth. The strategic move is to immediately chase a metric. Pick one measurable number income, leads generated, customers contacted, even specific savings, and chase that number for the next 30 days.
Instead of chasing the person's approval.
Exactly. You redirect the emotional energy immediately into value creation.
And to combat the most draining habit, which is rumination.
We implement the rejection recap. And you have to give yourself a strict time limit. 5 minutes max.
Just 5 minutes.
Just 5. Write down 3 things. 1, factually, what happened. 2, what does this actually mean? And crucially, it's a market signal, not a personal flaw. Maybe your pricing is off or your pitch is too vague.
And 3.
3, what is the one concrete action you will take next? Then you are done. Close the notebook. Stop the emotional spending.
I like that. Then there is the visibility ladder. Walker proved that assertion requires visibility. You can't just network aimlessly.
No, you have to build 3 rungs weekly and monthly. 1 public proof weekly, a case study showing results, a post demonstrating expertise.
A short analytical video, maybe?
Then 1 direct ask weekly. Pitch a client, seek a specific partnership, ask for a high-level introduction.
And the last run.
And 1 room monthly. Attend a target event, host a focused pitch meeting, join a relevant high-level forum. This converts that internal anger into a structured public demand for relevance.
I appreciate that structure because it takes the heat of anger and it binds it to a checklist. It stops you from just spinning your wheels.
Right.
And the final micro step here is highly effective because it leverages the emotional sting. Our sources suggest you write the sentence that stings.
Like, I'm tired of being overlooked, or I'm tired of my prices being too low.
Exactly. You take that raw frustration and turn it into a concrete short-term target for the next 14 days. It could be $500 saved, or launch my new premium offer.
Or raise my lowest rate by 25%.
Yes. And the most important rule of the pivot, do the first rep today. If you wait 24 hours, that emotional energy will dissipate into regret.
Take 1 action within 20 minutes of identifying that target. draft the pitch, write the outline for the public proof, build the landing page for the new offer.
Move the feeling immediately into productive creation.
Yeah.
That is the pivot achieved.
Right.
So Corcoran and Walker prove the power of that initial sprint. But if you win the sprint and you don't own the track, you still lose control.
And that control gap is often what causes the anger in the first place.
Which is why we need to move the focus from tactical response to strategic structural ownership. And that moves us right into part 2.
Part 2 is where anger scales up from a personal frustration to systemic, measurable infrastructure.
Okay.
We shift from asking for a seat at the table to building the entire building, setting up the terms, and owning the land the building sits on.
And the ultimate illustration of this has to be the Tyler Perry paradigm.
Absolutely. Tyler Perry's story starts in the 1990s with failed stage plays and periods of deep financial insecurity. I mean, he was homeless, living in his car.
Right, and the anger he felt wasn't directed at one individual betraying him. It was directed at the entertainment system itself.
Yeah, he realized it was not just competitive, but fundamentally built to ignore his audience, his stories, and his voice.
He was just facing a brick wall. The established industry Hollywood New York theater, it wasn't designed to support faith-based, community-driven content aimed at the overlooked Black community.
So waiting to be discovered meant waiting for approval from people whose metrics and values were diametrically opposed to his market.
So the profound strategic choice he made was to just stop waiting.
He redirected that systemic anger into radical self-sufficiency. He focused on owning the entire creative engine, writing, producing, directing, and acting in his projects.
He didn't just own the performance. He owned the means of production, distribution, and financing.
Right. He didn't rent his creativity. He owned the whole pipeline. He created this insulated economy around his brand.
And this approach culminates in the massive asset-building move that really defines his career. The physical infrastructure.
Yes. In 2015, Perry acquired the former Fort McPherson complex in Atlanta and opened Tyler Perry Studios in 2019.
And this location is strategically and symbolically massive. It's one of the largest production facilities in the U.S.
And it was previously a Confederate Army base.
Wait, I want to pause on that symbolic power for a second. He took a site historically linked to slavery and exclusion, a place that represented the ultimate gatekeeper of American society. And he transformed it.
He transformed it into a billion-dollar engine of Black creativity and employment. His anger didn't just become revenue. It became tangible, undeniable infrastructure that changes the economic landscape of a region.
That's the core directive. Perry's famous speech crystallized this thesis so beautifully. He contrasted fighting for a seat at the table with the decision to build my own.
And his mandate to his audience was clear. Own your stuff, own your business, own your way.
The moment you own the infrastructure, you move beyond the gatekeeper's calculus.
The principle Perry demonstrates is that the fastest way to stop being dismissed is to own the pipeline.
The IP, the audience list, the physical delivery systems.
Right. When you lack ownership, anger just leaks out as complaints. But when you own the pipeline, anger becomes pure direction.
So they won't open the door or transforms into...
I'll build the building and employ the community they ignored.
And if Perry proved that ownership beats asking permission, Reginald F. Lewis proved that ownership at scale beats gatekeepers entirely.
This is the Lewis thesis. Engineering access through scale.
Lewis's entire life was driven by this incredible ambition, but our sources trace its origin back to a deep-seated anger about discrimination.
Yeah, when he was just 6 years old, he overheard adult conversations about prejudice.
And it prompted a question that became his life's mission statement. Why should white guys have all the fun?
And that question, it's not a sign of despair or victimhood. It is a challenge. It's anger-shaped and refined into crystal-clear ambition.
And it articulated precisely what he refused to accept in his future.
Lewis's response to the gatekeepers of corporate finance was not to seek their approval, but to target size and scale.
Which required immense competence. He translated that ambition into legal and financial mastery.
So fast forward to 1987, Lewis is running his 4-year-old investment firm, TLC Group, and he's operating in the high-stakes, sharp-elbowed world of leveraged buyouts.
And the deal he executed next was just staggering in its scale and its audacity.
Exactly. We need to pause here to appreciate the mechanism. He used anger, shaped by ambition, to build competence and, critically, leverage. The deal was TLC's acquisition of the international food division of Beatrice Companies, for $985 million.
Almost $1 billion.
Yeah.
A deal of that size requires an understanding of high-level financial engineering. So for our listeners who may not deal with billion-dollar transactions, can you unpack what a leveraged buyout in LBO actually means? And why was Lewis executing this so groundbreaking?
Absolutely. So an LBO is a financial maneuver where a smaller acquiring firm like Lewis's TLC Group uses a tiny amount of its own money, that's the equity, and massive amounts of borrowed money debt to purchase a much larger established company.
So they leverage the assets of the company they're buying to secure the loans for the purchase.
That's it. So Lewis wasn't primarily using his own capital. He was using his financial acumen and his relationships to secure financing based on the earning potential of Beatrice International itself.
Wow.
It's extremely risky. It requires immense confidence and an ability to manage and repay massive debt loads very quickly.
So for Lewis and TLC, this deal was more than just profitable.
Oh, it was a landmark transaction. It instantly created a Black-owned enterprise that crossed the billion-dollar revenue threshold. He didn't just buy a seat at the table.
No, he bought the table, the restaurant, and then structured the finance to ensure he dictated the menu.
This illustrates the wealth path he mastered perfectly. Use anger to clarify what you refuse, then translate that refusal into a concrete strategy of unavoidable scale.
Lewis's childhood question led to a near billion-dollar outcome. He beat the gatekeepers by becoming unavoidable.
He structured deals so that no would have cost the financial world more than yes. The process is less emotional and almost entirely mathematical.
It's anger, ambition, competence, leverage, compounding.
And he built wealth until he could literally engineer his own gate and decide who walks through. That is structural ownership realized.
Okay, so let's extract the leverage stack for the listener. How do we take these billion-dollar moves and break them down into practical, scalable steps?
First, we demand distribution first. Before you spend 6 months perfecting your product or service, secure a predictable way to reach people.
Right, Perry proved that the highest demand is often found by targeting the overlooked audience first.
That means a dedicated email newsletter, a highly predictable sales call rhythm, a strong referral loop, or a consistent public content cadence. Distribution is leverage.
Second, reinvest to the other. Like a builder, Lewis and Perry never treated early profits as simple income. They were construction funds.
Exactly. Treat your profits as construction money for assets. Better equipment, specialized team members, systems that automate and compound your efforts.
Or marketing funnels that reduce your dependence on manual labor. You are building structural capacity.
Third, master the leverage stack. Commit to actively building one item in 4 specific categories this quarter.
Okay, what are they?
Skill leverage. Acquire a high-income skill that's hard to replace, like advanced negotiation or specialized financial modeling. Proof leverage. Accumulate undeniable evidence of results. Detailed case studies, quantified results, high-profile testimonials.
Okay.
Relationship leverage. Cultivate strategic connections, people who control distribution or financing, not just friends. And finally, capital leverage. Build a cash buffer or an investable surplus that lets you take risks without dependency.
That makes your value unavoidable because you've optimized all the inputs.
Yeah.
And finally, my favorite tactical rule here, the rage to research rule.
Yes. When you get angry about a financial or structural roadblock, a client tries to lowball you, or you realize you don't own a key asset, immediately stop ruminating and spend 30 minutes learning something critical about that roadblock.
Kind of the heat into clarity.
Exactly. If you're angry about your pricing, research advanced pricing models. If you're angry about a bad contract, research IP rights or contract structures. Emotion funds education.
And that competence allows you to move past the anger and into that Lewis level of control, which moves us perfectly into our final segment, defensive wealth.
Right. This is about using that deep-seated anger about past injustice or lack of control to design protective business policies and structural ownership that build permanent competitive moats. So the third stage of productively channeling anger, it involves using that powerful emotional memory to set new standards, not just for your own personal success, but for your entire sphere of influence and ultimately your industry.
And we have to look first at Howard Schultz and the core standard he established at Starbucks.
This story starts with the powerful scar, a foundational injustice. Schultz grew up in federally subsidized housing in Brooklyn. He watched his father, a blue-collar delivery driver, trying desperately to keep the family stable.
Right, and the core anger stemmed from watching his father suffer a terrible injury. He broke his hip and leg and was then dismissed without any health insurance or workers' compensation.
That experience wasn't some abstract news story. It was the visceral, immediate reality of watching a family's security and dignity just collapse overnight, all because the employer had no standards.
And Schultz carried that scar. And it became the fundamental design constraint for his future business.
The design question was, how do you build a massively scalable company, especially in a low-margin retail or service sector where a working-class injury doesn't instantly destroy a family?
And he aimed his standards-driven anger directly at designing a better, more ethical operating system that provided stability.
And this led to the creation of a massive structural moat. In 1988, Starbucks did something that was revolutionary in retail.
What was that?
They offered comprehensive health benefits to both full and part-time employees. And this wasn't just a moral choice, it was a profound financial strategy.
But wait, wasn't that an enormous immediate cost? I mean, how does a major expense like comprehensive health insurance become a defensive wealth strategy?
It did represent a massive cost, but the sources show this really counterintuitive financial advantage. The cost of the health benefits was immediately offset by a massive competitive advantage: extremely low employee turnover, or churn. In a high-volume service industry, constantly hiring, training, and onboarding new staff is incredibly expensive.
So the stability of the workforce became the financial moat.
That was it. The loyalty and retention generated by the Schultz standard translated into higher productivity, lower training costs, better customer experience.
Which ultimately saved millions and built a brand moat that competitors just couldn't easily replicate.
And he later reinforced this by introducing a stock program to turn employees into partners, giving them a slice of ownership.
So the wealth lesson is clear. Defensive wealth is wealth structured not just for growth, but for protection against external vulnerabilities.
In this case, high churn and employee dissatisfaction. The standard you refuse to compromise on becomes the structural defense of your company's long-term profit.
So the principle is that standards-driven anger is the anger that stakes. This injustice is unacceptable, and I'm going to build my life, my company, my rules so that this is not true in my world.
Your anger doesn't need to make you reckless. It can make you non-negotiable about quality, terms, and standards.
Okay, now we shift from building a corporate moat through policy to reclaiming intellectual property. Perhaps the most modern example of weaponized rejection we have.
The Swift strategy.
Taylor Swift is a global business, yet she faced a brutally common problem for creators. She did the creative work, but she did not own the underlying financial assets,
The masters.
the masters of her first 6 albums. And when Scooter Braun's company acquired Big Machine Records, she responded publicly, calling it her worst-case scenario.
And this is a textbook control problem, and we should probably clarify the technical asset that's at risk here.
Good idea.
We're talking about masters, which are the actual sound recordings. This is distinct from publishing rights, which cover the composition, the words, and music.
So masters represent the core long-tail revenue stream.
Exactly. The money from streaming, licensing for films, commercials, physical sales. Losing control of the masters is like building a multi-billion-dollar mansion on land someone else owns and can sell without your consent.
So her public response was this justified anger centered on the lack of control, but her business weapon was a radical, incredibly high-leverage workaround.
She announced and executed plans to re-record her entire catalog, branding them as Taylor's version.
Which is a fascinating and just unprecedented market maneuver in modern music history.
It really is. When Fearless, Taylor's version, was released in 2021, it wasn't just a creative project. It was a strategic, commercial effort to dilute the market value of the originals by shifting consumer demand entirely to the versions she fully owns.
She leveraged her current massive influence and her devoted audience to execute a legal and commercial refusal to accept the terms that were imposed upon her.
The genius is that she didn't just sue. She created a superior parallel product.
Right.
She utilized the existing emotional connection with her fans to turn a legal grievance into a market imperative. The fans now have a compelling financial and emotional reason to buy her version.
Which starves the old masters of their revenue potential.
The profound principle Swift illustrates here is this: anger is a diagnostic signal that you don't own enough of what you produce.
If your anger is fundamentally about control, the only satisfactory answer is ownership.
And the most useful anger is directed at the terms of the deal. Why am I doing the work but not controlling the asset?
So the wealth habit is to get clear, get legal, and get leverage. Don't confuse popularity with power.
Right. Followers are not leverage if you don't own the underlying asset, the IP rights, the equity, or direct proprietary access to the audience.
Okay, let's close this with the ownership checklist for the listener. How do they audit their own structural power and build their own Taylor's version?
First, execute a simple but absolutely vital rights audit. List everything you create, this quarter content, code, designs, client work, proprietary systems.
And for each one,
For each, you must determine who owns the copyright and IP. And critically, who has the perpetual right to profit from it later, even if you leave or the relationship ends.
if the answer isn't 100% you, then you have a vulnerability that needs structural defense.
Second, adopt the build version you own strategy. If you can't own the original asset because of contracts or institutional constraints, build a parallel asset you fully control.
Like a new, fully owned brand or a niche product line.
Or, most simply, a proprietary audience list, like an email newsletter, that cannot be taken away or sold by a platform. You redirect demand away from the version you don't control to the one you do.
Third, and this is where the real defense happens, upgrade your contracts. Stop relying on assumed ownership or verbal agreements.
Before you sign anything, especially large client agreements or partnership deals, demand clarity on IP, usage rights, and reuse.
If you don't set the terms, someone else will, and their financial incentives will always be opposed to yours.
Use your past anger or just the knowledge of these case studies to fuel non-negotiable contract upgrades.
And the final micro step.
Make a firm plan today to rebuild or repackage one thing. A piece of content, a service, a small product, in a form you own end to end.
And commit to publishing the first step of that process this week.
This is how you move from complaining about unfair terms to dictating profitable, defensible ones.
We have covered a vast amount of territory today. We've traversed centuries and industries, but the synthesis, I think, is really clear.
It is.
We've moved through 3 high-leverage stages of productive anger, examining how these powerful individuals successfully leveraged rejection into structural power.
First, we had the personal pivot, exemplified by Corcoran and Walker, turning that personal dismissal and humiliation into a measurable public assertion.
A rigid scoreboard, forcing an immediate transition from emotion to action.
Second, the structural scale, demonstrated by Perry and Lewis, converting systemic anger about invisibility and discrimination into hard assets, into infrastructure, and into massive financial leverage.
Building the building, buying the table.
Exactly. And third, the defensive mode, which we drew from Schultz and Swift, using those emotional scars and anger about structural injustice to set non-negotiable standards for corporate policy, IP control, and long-term ownership.
Ensuring structural permanence.
Right.
The ultimate takeaway for you, the listener, is this. Anger is a short-duration, high-thrust fuel. It has to be aimed, it must be bound immediately to a measurable outcome.
And then, almost instantly, it must be replaced by discipline, competence, and strategy.
The goal is not to stay angry. The goal is to use the heat to refuse a smaller, less defensible life.
And we started with the tactical pivot, but I think Reginald F. Lewis gives us the final, powerful maxim that sums up this entire deep dive.
Which is?
Don't beg to be chosen build until they have to explain why they didn't.
So consider this. What single structure, what core product, or what piece of undeniable leverage can you start building today that is so robust and so well-defined that it fundamentally forces the gatekeepers, whoever they are in your industry, to change their entire calculus regarding your value?
That's your next mission.
That's the charge.